In part 1, we learnt the history of the scallop fishery beginning in Tasmania, and how the action shifted to Port Phillip Bay in Victoria when beds were discovered there in 1963. These beds were fished out by the late 1960s. We take up the story again when new beds were discovered on the east coast of Victoria, off Lake's entrance. Competing interest between locals and newcomers led to what became known as the Scallop Wars.
The Scallop Wars, as they were known as, began in the 70s and through into the 80s.
It was almost like gang warfare. Some pretty rough times.
He had a big bluey coat and a sawn-off shotgun. He went in the pub and bang, bang in the air.
There was always animosity about when the Bay guys...
There was a police car parked in our street for the better part of 2 weeks.
And this guy comes out with a rifle and points it at me.
They put a hole in it at the wharf here, the Melinda.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy Lake's entrance, guys.
It was 1969 that the new rush was on, the new El Dorado, a repeat of the Port Phillip rush of just 5 years earlier.
There didn't appear to be any licences, you just went scallop fishing.
Within a couple of years, there were 100 boats working out of Lake's entrance, many of them unsuited for the open ocean.
Virtually all the boats that were in Port Phillip Bay, transited to lakes to go fishing, and a bigger fleet of inappropriate boats, you would be hard pressed to assemble in one place. It was just, what was suitable for the bay was not going to work out Lake's entrance.
Even quite a few boats, when they came from Port Phillip, some of them got lost. They went the wrong way, or what? 2 or 3 of them nearly sank on the way coming from Port Phillip. They're old wooden cray boats, they were. Yeah.
Within a 6-month period, probably 80% of those sort of boats had disappeared. They'd either taken them back to the bay or they'd actually lost them. It was Klondike stuff, this was the Wild West, and there was boats being built everywhere, and like in the heyday here in Lakes, we were putting out between 16 and 20 semi-trailers of scallops 5 days a week.
Were you?
Yeah.
And they'd go to Melbourne?
That was all Melbourne, and then locally we had three factories in Lake's entrance and 1, maybe 2 in Bairnsdale.
The scallop processors were a vital section of the fishery. Without them, nothing happened. Greek immigrants were well represented in the industry, both as fishers and processors. Tom Kivilos being the largest operator over a long period, it was a section of the industry with its own set of challenges and rewards.
There were a lot of processors in Melbourne. I probably couldn't remember them all, but yeah, there would be about 30. Yeah. There was Tommy Kivilas, Russell Crayfish, Dulles Seafoods, VSFD. Oh, Jesus. I can't remember them all. There was a lot. But the French are connoisseurs of seafood. They loved our scallops. They loved Port Phillip Bay scallops and Bass Strait scallops. And when we had coastal seafoods in Belmont, we had 50 splitters there working for us, which was chaos. Work, scallops coming in, containers going out to France overseas and that, and in the local market, it was good. We were going through an agent, because originally we started going through an agent in Melbourne, and he was playing a bit of funny buggers with price. It wasn't there. We weren't going to make any money. So me and my brother decided, and we went to Europe. Went to France. We never knew anyone. We couldn't speak French. And I said, where are we going to find these buyers? So we went to a big supermarket and found a bag of scallops there. So we look at it and, oh yeah, who's this fella in Paris? Had the phone number. I rang up the secretary, and we went there. And I remember we had 3 containers of scallops. We had 10 tonnes a container of processed scallop in 10-kilo boxes. And we told him what we had, and the prices gave us, it was unbelievable. We couldn't get it in Australia. So we just sold it like that. He put the LC in our bank. We came back and sent him the shipment over. And that's how we used to operate. LC in the bank, and then load shipping documents to the bank and get paid straight away. Yeah, which was good.
The lake's entrance bar was dangerous to cross in big seas. Boats were wrecked and lives were lost. It caused problems for operators over a long period, even for the larger boats.
Certainly my brothers have got some stories about smashed in wheelhouses or smashed in windows I started off on the Gemini down there, which was a 43-footer, and my brother took over that boat, Graham. And then I went on to the Barbara J, and the Barbara J was designed for the Lakes Entrance Bar, wheelhouse back aft, big buff head bow on it, and she'd just smash her way out through anything, and she wouldn't broach, so we could drive her in, and even with a good sea running, she'd just hold the course all the way. So, but there was all those times where you're trying to get out and the sea would lift you up and just pound you on it, and you just leave her going full throttle there, and the next one will lift you up and you go a bit further, and your legs go a bit jelly when you got out, but away you went. Young, wouldn't do it now, not for all the tea in China.
You think you're going to be in for a nice calm trip and a southeaster will appear out of nowhere, and you're coming home, you've got to get in over the bar, and you radio up and they say, oh yeah, it's 4 or 5 metres swell, because gives you a bit of interesting time coming up to the bar.
I didn't like Lakes Entrance. We got sprung there one time, going in there with the Nereus. We ended up on the sand. It wasn't very nice. It's side on, and we had the arms out still. I don't know if she still got arms on her, but we had our arms then. The paravanes were folded up, and yeah, we ended up side on. One of the arms was going into the sand. It was actually trying to leave her out of the deck almost, and yeah, that was a bit scary. And yeah, we're in the surf. The boat rolled over, and I remember looking around at the tray. I was looking up at the lights above the tray, and I saw this lip of this wave, and the white water just broke over the top of the lights. I was like, fuck, and I actually dodged under the lip of the tray, the sorting tray at the back, and I was sort of in between the tray and the bulwarks, and it went down and hit, and it hit Trouty, and it just took him off his feet, and he went down the side of the wheelhouse, and he got washed out over near where the shark reel, where the stabiliser's upright was, and then the shark reel was a bit in front of that. He sort of went up and over through there as the boat rolled over, and all the water just took him with him, and he put his arm through one of the spokes of the shark reel, and he just hung on, and he didn't get washed over the side. He was just laying there on the top of the captain rail, hanging on to and then the boat, all the water drained off, and the boat rolled back the other way, and I went down and grabbed him and pulled him back on, and I was like, oh, you know, I didn't enjoy Lakes Entrance, guys. And we ended up getting off.
Yeah, we've towed quite a lot of boats off the beach and off the bar. We've been stuck on the bar a few times, but towed off a couple of times, and part of life here. It's not bad now. The bar's good, but say 30 years ago it was pretty average.
With my little boat, well, I was only shallow, so I didn't really have to worry too much about the bar too much. Going out across on the leads, I could slip down. There was a bit of a gutter and ran along the beach. And I was able to slip along this little gutter very close to the beach and slip out on a nice calm area. Yeah. But I wouldn't try it of a night time, just of a morning when I could see what was going on.
It was in the early 70s that for the first time attempts were made to limit effort in the fishery, with daily bag limits and licensing.
And of course there was a lot of angst in that the Port Phillip Bay fellas came to lakes and started fishing, and you know the lakes blokes were going to be locked out, so then the government issued licences for Lakes Entrance to the locals, and that led to the creation of the two classes of licence, the lakes only and the dual licence.
So they issued just over 30 licences to Lakes Entrance, those boats, and they restricted them, so they couldn't go to the west of Wilson's Prop. And at the same time, the boats that were left in Port Phillip Bay, of which there was around about 20 odd boats, you know, there's might have been 21, 22, they restricted them from leaving Port Phillip Bay. And to this day, I don't think the fisheries, if they could have gone back, they would have changed everything, because it created this massive issue between the 3 licence system, where you had boats that could go wherever they wanted, and you had boats that were locked into Port Phillip Bay and boats that were locked into Lakes Entrance. And hence the Scallop wars, as they were known as, began in the 70s and through into the 80s. So 3 pubs in Lakes Entrance, and there was a Central Hotel down in town. It's called Festival Hall. There was a club hotel still down in Lakes, and then there was a Climina. And there was always animosity about when the Bay guys, and because we were dual licence guys, or we had an all Victorian waters licence, we could travel wherever we wanted. We were known as the Bay guys because we go down to Lakes Entrance, and there was issues, there was animosity. We were sharing the grounds. We were competing for crew at the time, and of course when we went back to Port Phillip Bay, we were known as the Lakes fishermen, and the same deal. We were on the toe. We were competing for crew and competing for area as well. But the fights at Lakes Entrance, the blues, the arguments, and Festival Hall, that nickname was given to the Central Hotel. That was the closest pub to where everybody unloaded, to the Scallop unloading wharf, which is still what it's known as today. And invariably, after a couple of frothies, somebody'd say something, somebody'd turn around, and it'd be on. So it was quite regular. And as we were there when we were young, and one of the culls was usually involved somewhere along the way there, and it was usually Graham. I was the mouth, he was the muscle, and John was the backup. And that's the way we worked.
You could have your frank discussions, as they call it, and your arguments and everything like that. But then once you got out on the fishing grounds and it was just all annulled, you did your job, you came in, and then you start again.
It was almost like gang warfare.
Remember John Stavros ended up getting a name, Shotgun John. He comes in there one night, I don't know, he must have had a few beers in him, someone must have annoyed him, and he had a big bluey coat and a sawed-off shotgun. He went in the pub and bang, bang in the air. The bar emptied him for a couple of minutes. So, yeah, we had a few commotions up there.
Where we had the gang of goodies from northern Tasmania against the Allied boats and against some of the Victorians that we didn't like, and then there's groups of Victorians we did like. So, yeah, it was almost close to being gang warfare. Not ever erupted into anything like that, but you had your favourites, and then there were always some people who'd be truthful with you and tell you what they were catching and sort of invite you over to where they were working. There was others who'd say they were catching nothing and then suddenly disappear with a boat full of scallops and that sort of thing. So you lock that one in the memory bank for next time. But that was all just part of the game, I think.
I don't remember anybody shooting each other, although Reggie Northrope's boat they put a hole in it at the wharf here, the Melinda. They drilled a hole in it, and while he was scalloping, must have upset somebody.
The first limit that we had on the boats here in Lakes Entrance was 15 bags a day, and then it jumped to 30, and then it jumped to 50, and then it went to 70.
So in the early 60s, it went down, and then it fluctuated from there on, and a lot of it was reflected on how good Lakes Entrance was. So when we all left the bay, it had time to recuperate. There wasn't many boats there. They were generally the smaller operators. They were smaller boats, so weather played a factor in it, where they couldn't work like the 60-footers could work. So it got time to heal, for want of a better word, and replenish. And of course, then we'd come back.
Catches in the early 90s, we used to get our limit pretty easy. I think it was 10 or a dozen crates. So it was a square galvanised steel crate. I think it was 10 or a dozen of them, or maybe, I think that's all it was. There was a lot of boats doing it. There was a lot of boats on the drag. There was the odd collision. Yeah, there was a few of them. Yeah, no, it was back in those days too. You had lots of older boats on the drag too, lots of old timber boats. Yeah, you had everything. There was just all sorts of boats on the drag. Yeah. No, the bay was pretty good fishing. It was. I think it was 4 days. It was 4 days a week, Monday to Thursday. And if you missed a day, bad luck. You didn't get to go and catch them again. But everyone pretty much got them.
And when we come back, there was limits more limits they put on, and the more restrictions they put on. It worked it worked to a point. But then as the boats increased in size and they became more Bass Strait style of boats, they were able to work every day of the week, every day that they were allowed. So they cut it back to 5 days a week, then they cut it back to 4 days a week. Then there was roster systems came in where we could only work 3 days a week. The hours were shut down too quite early on. They were closed down in the 60s to 5 in the morning till 5 at night. That was the only time you could work. So they were bringing it down and down. And we were finding also in Port Phillip Bay as time went on, we were competing for area. So as the mussel aquaculture industry came in, they needed area. The angling side of the recreational fishing side of things, they wanted their weekends. So all of this sort of came in as a sort of like a balancing act. It was trying to work it out, but we were certainly the punching ball. We lost every argument as time went on.
And then in 82, we would have been back in lakes. Cape Conran had sort of collapsed, and we started working west of lakes at Barracuda.
That's a Barracuda rig.
Barracuda oil rig, yes. About 27 nautical miles west of lakes. I think it's about 7 miles offshore. So there was a big strip, and in the days when we worked the one area for a long period of time, very intensely, the amount of scallops almost seemed bottomless. But anyhow, from what I remember, the Barracuda oil rig ran for that area to the west for 2, maybe 3 years. Then it collapsed as well, and everybody was looking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Tasmania had been experiencing the same volume of fish, and they were working their way north, and where there'd always been this imaginary line in the middle of Bass Strait that separated the two fisheries, some people decided to challenge that.
Well, we went to Tassie. The scallops were starting to go downhill at Lake's entrance, and the condition of them. So the way that the scallops are worked out and the quality of scallop that you've got is how many pieces per 100. So once you go down under 100, you're starting to get into where the processors valued them more. And we were over 100. We were about 110, 120 scallops per kilo. So Babel Island and Flinders Island area down in Tassie, they'd started up, and their scallops per kilo were down around the 50, 60, and of course they were in demand. Our markets were depleting, our price was dropping, and there was no doubt that we then had to go and we knew that they were in Commonwealth waters, so we didn't need a Tasmanian licence. And so there was 4 of us that hatched this plan in Festival Hall in the Central Hotel. We got one of the charts out, spread it out over the pool table, worked out where we were going, how long, and anyway, we applied the fisheries. We're on a 70 bag daily trip limit, and we applied the fisheries to increase that to 110 for equivalent of a 3-day trip limit, and the fisheries agreed, which was great. So 4 of us headed off. Billy Rose on the Robert R. Ray Fernley on the Southern Cross, and Ono Blank was out there on the Sea Home. And anyway, we got down there. There was a lot of boats. It would have been about 30 or 40 boats on the tow. And here are these Victorians, these northerners. So first tow up was okay, second tow back, I'm alongside a boat, and this guy comes out with a rifle and points it at me. Rosie on the Robert R wasn't far away, and he got on the blower and said, natives are restless, Cully. I said, you think?
And that was when we moved into, Bass Strait and south around Flinders Island, the Sisters, Babel. The first week we were there was a bit of argy-bargy on the radio from the Tasmanian boats, and then after a bit I heard one of the Tasmanian guys said, well, they're just blokes out making a living like us. I think we better get over it, and we all worked together from, I don't even think the anxiety lasted a day.
And as time went on, a lot of these people that we met on that day became good friends. However, that initial contact, for want of a better word, was a bit bristly.
There was a 210 bag limit when you went down to Flinders Island, until someone said, well, if the rest of the rules were only a pipe dream, maybe we'll just push this as well, because Tasmanian boats weren't on the limit, only Victorian boats. So a couple of boats decided to just bring in a big load and see what happened. Fisheries just turned their head and ran away, and then it was open. It was an open fishery. It was your processor if he could handle it, you could catch it.
So with no enforceable bag limit or quota, it was open slather.
No one was saying stop. And it's a bit like the old Aldous Huxley saying, where he said that the resources of the oceans are inexhaustible. Well, there seemed to be fisheries managers thought that as well.
Then came the really big loads and really long hours. But let's backpedal a few years and see what the Tasmanians had been doing during the 1970s, while the Victorians had been busy at Lake's entrance. The Bass Strait fishery had begun southeast of Prime Seal Island in 1972.
Between Kangaroo and Prime Seal in the middle there, about 3 mile off each actually, 2.5, 3 mile off each of them, out towards Goose a little bit, but very sheltered, very pleasant, easy to work, but unfortunate part about then was we had to travel back to the Tamer, because there's no processing facility much on Flinders Island at that point in time. So we travelled back to the Tamer with the fish, and because we had the biggest boat, we got the roll-off cart and all of the fish back to the processors, back to Beauty Point.
This was in the Concord?
In the Concord, yeah. She was only brand new then, and the biggest boat in the fleet. The big 12-foot dredge on her. No one had seen a dredge that big before. So we were big time, but we didn't know much about what we were doing. And that peed us off a lot. Too many boats there, of course, and it was only a small area. And all the bigger boats from the cray fishery all finished up in the scallop fishery in the winter time, which was good. Gives the crays a spell. It was great. And so then I got adventuresome and went out the east side of Flinders, out off the pot boil there, and started investigating out there, and found quite a bit of scallop there. We'd found scallops there on our shark longline gear.
Throughout the 1970s, beds were progressively found along the north coast of Tasmania in intermittent patches from Bank Strait to Table Cape. In about 1980, new scallop beds were found east of Flinders Island. The biggest beds were east of Babel Island. Dennis McQueen remembers coming up the east coast in the break sea.
And you would get up off, nearly up to Clark Island, halfway across the Bass Strait, and in the distance you'd see a glow. That's where we're going. All the scallop boats working at night time. And there'd be, I don't know, Gary, we didn't have time to count them, but there'd be 30 at least. They'd have to be. 18, 30. Yeah, you can see the glow of the lights. And that was interesting on a drag, because everybody do the same speed and everybody held a straight line.
Well, night time was just like a city. Boats everywhere steaming from a bloody house.
You could virtually step aboard the boat in the night time, going alongside you, but we was all doing the same thing. They're just, the Marine Board would be horrified if they watched all that.
In complete contradiction to any other fishery, the boats operated together to work the scallops up, for mutual benefit. The theory being that the scallops tired of swimming out of the way of the dredges, so were easier to catch.
Working the scallops up, they reckon that the scallops either are in dips in the sea where the tide runs through, or they all lay on the bottom and you don't get, and they move up, they get disturbed and they move up, so you get them more after a few drags or whatever.
What was known as the drag was an imaginary line across a bed of scallops. This was typically something less than a mile long. 4 drags an hour was considered average. Originally a flag known as a Dan buoy was dropped at both ends of the drag. At times there could be as many as 50 boats crowded on the one drag.
I don't know, maybe 50 or 80 boats, it's 100 boats, I'm not sure. A lot. And you really got to be sharp where you're going to. You can't just shoot away in the middle of nowhere. Quite often we'd be on the drag with the others, but I've seen some bad tangled ups. Yeah, you get 2 or 3 boats tangled up down in Bank Straits with the tide runners. It's not pretty. We were down there one day and there was 7 boats in a mob, just drifting off into the distance trying to untangle themselves. Yeah.
So yeah, it was very common that you'd start off not catching many, and then that would improve. But interestingly, down off in Bank Strait, I remember, can't think who it was now, but one of the Tassie fisheries fishing guys called up on the radio, or talking on the radio. He said, "Oh, come down." He said, "They'll be good down here." So we steamed down, got there, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning or something. And I got there and we had about 6 drags for a bag. And this is on the bronze wing, which was a 30-metre boat. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "No, hang around. And when it got dark, we did this for, I don't know, 8 hours or something. 3 drags for a bag, 3 drags. When it got dark, 6 bags of drag. And I just, nobody can tell me why that happened. None of the scientists or whatever just don't know.
One of the funniest things that happened was in the start of the Allied fisheries, when most of their skippers and crews didn't know an awful lot about scallops. And in those days we didn't have GPS, so we'd find a bed of scallops and we'd put a flag at each end of it just to mark it, and you'd tow up and down between the flag. And someone had accidentally cut the anchor off the flag. And so we were working north of Flinders, about 1.5 knots, 2 knots of tide, so this flag disappeared over the horizon with all these Allied fishery boats following it. Well, this is a good trick. So then for a while, if a stingray came up, you'd tie the stingray to a flag and turn it loose, and you'd watch the fleet disappear over. You'd tell all your mates and on your so-called secret radios what was going on, and you'd see them disappear over the horizon chasing this flag, and tide would turn and they'd all come back again.
In 1982, the grounds off Babel Island were producing very good catches, and this is when the Victorians got wind of it, as previously mentioned. Part of the bed was in Commonwealth waters, which the Victorians targeted, and the rest were in state waters, the boundary being the 3-mile limit. Neither side of the border was regulated. As time went by, the waters inside state waters were producing better than those in Commonwealth waters. The Victorians were required to have state licenses. Tasmanian Fisheries very kindly obliged.
There was a police boat actually anchored under Babel, selling out licences over the side. They cost $50 to buy a licence. And we're still trying to buy those licences back out of the fishery now. Yeah.
Bigger boats with bigger dredges and larger capacity arrived on the scene, coming in with catches never before seen.
For me, Lady Miriam was the right boat in the right time. Big steel, able-bodied, 60-foot boat with over the years we've put up to 40 tonne of product on her, so she was a big body boat, and just the right thing in the right spot. Biggest load we ever had on the Lady Miriam was 645 bags, 35-40 tonne, which was the biggest load that came into Lake's entrance for a whole 8 hours, because Chris Fenner was behind us on the bronze wing with 870 or something. So we were heroes for a few hours at least.
On reflection, Chris adjusted his figure down to 460 bags.
We had 620 bags. Yeah, we left on the bronze wing, and I think we had 4 crew. And we were down off Babel, and we fished in the elephant turds, they called them. They're big green hard sponge, and it was weird that you could tow through them at normal speed and just get a dredge full of these elephant turds with a few scallops. But if you drop your dredge down and just towed really low, really slow, you'd fill up with pure scallops almost.
Scallops, being a perishable product, needed to be delivered for processing within 3 days of being caught, and this only made possible with refrigeration. So from the time the first scallops were caught, the clock was ticking to fill the boat before time ran out. This necessitated working around the clock, literally.
They want to be on the factory floor being split by the 4th day, the start of the 4th day.
The most hours straight I ever did was 47. Yeah, and that was, I was knackered too. I had bloody tendinitis. You get tendinitis in your wrist from going like that all the time, picking up scallops. I think the boys on the sand groper, they did a 66-hour stint. I don't know if Graham was on there then. I think it might have been Brownie.
Yeah, I reckon the most we ever done was about 64 hours straight. If you mention that to people today, they'd go, not a hope in hell, but you just did it. You just did it, and the worst part is when the radios were going full bore an hour and a half before daylight, because that hour and a half to 2 hours before daylight, that's when you started to get the nods on. So the crap that come over the radio to keep everybody awake was incredible. There were some great stories come out. I wouldn't know what they were now, but there was great stories, and it kept you awake.
There were some pretty tough blokes who were scalloping for sure. Yeah, probably for me, I think probably the boat that stands out the most would be the Sand Groper of Graham Coles. She was a tough boat.
Tough boat in what way?
Oh, she was just a brute of a thing, big brute of a boat. She was just a big boat, and she had like a tough skipper, and the crew were tough as well. I think it was Pricey and Lockie, and they were legendary. Like, they used to work just 2 up on the tray, and mate, those blokes, I reckon you'd get out of their way on the drag, and you'd get out of their way in the pub as well. You wouldn't get in their way.
We were working pretty long hours, and you'd be out the back working and sewing the bags up, and you'd go to try and trolley them up the deck, and you'd have them sewed to the rail and all sorts of silly things, because you were that tired you just didn't know what you was doing.
Yeah, but that night work, geez, I remember coming home one night. We was always on the wheel, but I remember we come past Clark there, was going through to Booty Point, out around that shoal. You have to go down the middle of the Straits. And I dropped on the floor, on the wheelhouse floor.
Asleep.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing, but you only need 10 minutes.
On the good boats, they play with food too. If they keep the calories up to you and just keep the food in you and have a coffee and have this and have that, and you sort of just, and a good crew can keep you up and about too. A good leading hand will keep the blokes going, and it's all a bit of banter. It just keeps you up and about. Yeah, no, it's good.
And I said, no orders. You'll get your coffee and a hamburger or whatever was in a sandwich. And none of us stopped.
Bass Strait is a notoriously rough stretch of water, but to the scallop fishermen, it was their office summer and winter. Inevitably, there were smaller, older boats unsuited to the weather and deck loads carried, but somehow they all survived.
It certainly give you insight into the capacity of what them boats were capable of, with the deck loads on them. Amazing, really. Thankfully, We didn't have any mast or Commonwealth safety measures on them boats in place because very few of them would have been working at all.
The weather could be challenging enough, even in larger steel boats.
Yeah, we've had some real good hard blows down in Bank Straits when the tide's running. I always found the scallops went better when you were side onto the swell. The boat was rolling, but it wasn't going up and wasn't pitching so much, and which made the dredge would work better. So it was uncomfortable. These are the days before wobble stoppers and wings and things. I wish we had them there. It would have been good. Yeah, Bank Straits, very rough down there. Yeah, especially when the tide was running the wrong way.
The bad one was getting down to Bichno with the southerly, and that's straight up the coast and through Bass Strait with that tide and that.
Headed home with 180 bags and finished up unloading 150. We were just washing them over the side. We weren't prepared for exactly what we were going to put these boats through. So we were just stacking these bags up like we would normally do it on a Lakes Entrance daily trip. And pretty soon we worked out that we had to sew the tops of them, we had to lay them down. But that first trip was a nasty one home. But we learnt from it, and of course we're out there 3 days later and we're doing it again.
I think the human brain sort of locks away things where you had a tough time. I remember coming back from Flinders with a load of scallops on, and it was horrendous. The Empress of Australia was running then, and I heard them say it was gusting 70 knots as they left the mouth of the river at Devonport, and I'm thinking, I think it's all of that, and I'm halfway between Flinders and Devonport. Now, that was not frightening, but damn unpleasant.
What in?
This was in Del Ritchie, the first Del Ritchie, so big enough to be safe, but damn unpleasant to be on.
As the Babel Island beds began to suffer from overfishing, new beds were discovered by boats transiting from Lakes Entrance. These beds were roughly 15 to 20 miles northeast of Outer Sister Island. The gold rush maintained its momentum.
Found a huge bed of scallops up there, 20 miles long and 20 miles wide. It was just masses of scallops there.
Sorting scallops from the rubbish that came up in the dredge was a slow and laborious business. Yet again, necessity being the mother of invention, help was on its way. In 1984, Kevin and Harry Mitchelson came up with the tumbler for sorting scallops, the greatest labour saver since the invention of the self-tipper.
When we stopped tuna fishing, we went scalloping, just picking them up by hand and putting them in bags, and we decided there had to be a better way of doing it. So what we did, we built this tumbler here, and with a flume, and the water washes the scallops into the tumbler, washes all the sand out of them, and we increased our catching capacity by about 200%. Not that you catch them that quicker, but when they're really firing, you can't put them away. So what we've got here is something that can handle 40 or 50 bags an hour without any trouble. The first day we went fishing with this, we were listening on the secret channel that the Tasmanians were on, and they were laughing at us, and now every boat's got one. You wouldn't go to sea without one now because you can't get enough crew to pick them up. And it's easy too, really easy. This was on the mass bank of this one. The Dagrad never actually went scalloping. Our first trip I think was 400 bags in 24 hours, and then we come home, and after that 400 bags I think it's about 40 tonne, and it's just a really nice one day. When the scallops are good you can catch them easy.
Harry Mitchelson with the mass banker put on a massive dredge, a massive tumbler, and that was the start of the revolution. That was a real one-off. No one else, well, firstly had a boat big enough to put it on, or the gear heavy enough to put it on.
He certainly showed everybody what was capable of being done, and we wasn't long tricking onto that either. It wasn't very long before there's a few of the smarties got together and start doing likewise.
But what we're doing now is is really a refinement of what Harry did back in the 80s.
We were half a dozen crew to do this job over a couple of days. Was 3 crew could do it in 10 hours.
During the early 1980s, there was an immense amount of pressure being put on scallop stocks. This was exacerbated by the arrival on the scene of Allied fisheries. This was an organisation instigated by a group of accountants, which involved setting up companies to invest in scallop boats in order to benefit from generous tax incentives involved in writing off boats.
Anyone that wanted to go and fish there, basically. So then along comes Allied Fisheries, and they put about, 20-odd 60-foot steel boats together, pretty quick smart, most of them based off Concord. Then they built some wheelhouse half boats. They had a fair fleet of boats running around.
And Allied Fisheries started building boats all around Australia, and Tasmania were issuing licences, and it became a problem. We had a lot of boats now entering the fishery, and we're going through another boom period.
Up till the mid-80s, they were massive, 25,000 tonnes a year. Shell weight was being landed. When Allied came in as the Tasmanian industry, we'd got the government to put a moratorium on the issue of any more licences, and the government had stopped issuing licences. They just happened to lift the moratorium for 24 hours to issue 30 licences for Allied Fisheries and then put the moratorium back in place again. So that was the sort of thing we were up against.
And that was a fact, was it?
That was an absolute fact. I won't say who the Fisheries Minister was, but if he sees this, he'll know exactly who I'm talking about.
In this Commonwealth no man's land fishery, with no licences, no quotas, no management, no nothing. It was always headed for disaster.
By about 1986, with 120 boats operating, the writing was on the wall. Catches were falling dramatically. Boats began leaving the fishery. Some went into the already overexploited shark fishery, some into lobster fishing, and a few larger vessels were converted for orange roughy fishing. And yet others sought new scallop beds elsewhere. New beds were eventually found east and south of King Island. In 1992, new beds were found south of Bell Reef, which at 80 metres were the deepest scallops had been fished in Australia. The beds were also exposed to the open ocean.
South of Bell Reef from the west coast, in a wild blue yonder, 40 fathom out there, and that was good fun. 20 or 30, 40 knots of westerly out there was very entertaining. The only good part about that was actually better than 30 knots of wind off the east coast of Flinders Island, actually, because you're fishing in the big ocean swell, and it's a lot easier on the boat and the gear where you wasn't crashing and bashing all the time.
A man was lost overboard one black winter's night when the fleet were working south of Bell's Reef.
I reckon there was probably, there would have been 50 or 60 boats on the drag, I reckon. And everybody lined up, they're all side by side and they had the lights going doing the sweep to find this bloke. And he was not there to be found. And we looked for him for hours. And yeah, I couldn't believe that someone could disappear that quick. It was actually a bit, I don't know if he could swim. I don't know the bloke. I don't know anything about him. But I remember looking for him for a fair while. Being a fisherman, you've sort of got to say, well, that's not going to happen to me, isn't it? That's the attitude you have to take. That's never going to happen to me, because otherwise, if you thought it was going to happen to you, you'd never leave the wharf, would you? But anyway, there's things like that happen. It's unfortunate. It's disappointing, but that's the price you pay for fish, isn't it? Really.
A lot of fish caught there for a couple of years, and then the King Island grounds slowly but surely got developed, and that was good for 10 years. And back them days we had 50 or 60 boats working there, and they knocked that down pretty quick smart.
Sadly, fisheries in particular suffer from an economical and environmental science problem known as the tragedy of the commons. This is where individuals have access to a shared resource and act in their own interest at the expense of other individuals and the resource. Google it up.
You got to give the scallops credit. They tried really hard. They kept coming back, but every time they popped their head up with 120 boats, we soon cleaned them out. Bank Strait lasted for about 2 years when they came back in there. Topper King lasted for a little while, but yeah, just far too many boats, all trying to catch too much and no restrictions at all.
Some will say that it is the fisherman's job to catch fish, and it is the fishery manager's job to manage the fishery. However, it is a very difficult job to manage a fishery unless the fishermen are on side, and this rarely happens until the horse has well and truly bolted.
It wasn't really until the late 90s, early 2000s, where we started to get some really good signs. IMAS in particular from down here did some, I think, looking back on it, outstanding work. A lot of people were very critical of them, saying, no, that can't be right because we know that the scallops are 6 foot deep on the bottom because we can see where we've been and we've dug them out and we worked them up. And I did a lot of work with IMAS and putting cameras on the dredges. We could see that they weren't 6 feet deep on the bottom, they were just scattered on the bottom. And when we thought we were working them up, we were actually just taking the tops off the sand ripples so the dredge could actually get at them. So we learnt a hell of a lot out of that. We learnt a lot about leaving a spawning biomass and leaving a dense spawning biomass. Wasn't much use just leaving scattered scallops on the bottom because they're not dense enough to create another bed. So we learnt the hard way that you've got to level up behind. You've got to leave dense beds behind so that they can spawn.
It's tough fisheries management, particularly trying to manage the likes of scallops, which I remember one of the guys on the AFMA saying trying to manage scallops is like trying to manage bogong moths. They're just, one year there's millions of them and the next year there's none.
By about 2000, everything had collapsed. Every time a scallop poked its head up with 120 boats out there, that they soon cleaned them up again. And there was a total closure for about 10 years. And a lot of hardship for a lot of people.
The Bass Strait fishery obviously had its problems through there being too many boats. The Port Phillip Bay area suffered difficulties from a different area. The fishermen battled for years against the recreational lobby and conservationists.
We lost every argument as time went on.
The bay was closed to commercial scallop fishing in 1997.
Port Phillip Bay was a backbone of the scallop industry. It closed down, we lost our markets, we lost France, we lost export because we used to get telexes from France, say, look, we want 10 containers a year or 5 containers or whatever. We'd say, yep, no worries, you got it. Because in Port Phillip Bay, we had the boats, we could work 7 days a week, even though at the end we were working 4 days a week voluntarily through the fisheries. And that sort of just knocked our industry out, just demolished it. The market just fell on its back. We never had a good market because we never had the continuity. In anything, if you haven't got the continuity for export, you're barking up the tree, you get nowhere.
The Bass Strait fishery was virtually closed for 10 years, apart from a few mopping up operations with too many boats and not enough scallops. The fishery was at a very low ebb. However, the bed did benefit from being spelled.
Now the proof's in the pudding. King Island, which we started fishing in 2016, just amazes. The more we take out of it, the more scallops there are there every year. It's just simply amazing. In fact, it appears to have almost got to the stage we've got too many scallops, and I never thought I'd say this. We've got too many scallops, so not enough food for them all. It brought a lot of rationalisation to the industry, and we went from the 120 boats that were fishing then to the 5 or 6 fair dinkum boats that are there now and a couple of others that are sort of part-time. And scallop fishery has never been so good. But yeah, we had to collapse it first to prove that you can easily overfish them.
Off King Island there now, It's mind-boggling actually. After 60 odd years I've seen a fair few scallops and areas caught and fished and everything, and I ain't never seen nothing like that. That is just, they are biblical numbers what you catch there now, like where it used to take. A good catch rate back early days was 8 bags an hour, 50 kilo a bag, about 400 kilo an hour was real good fishing. If you're not catching a tonne an hour, you're going pretty slow now. And we get up 1.5 tonne, 2 tonne an hour now. And the best part of that is when you go home and tie up and have an afternoon off, the crew are not knocked up. It's all done by machinery, and you can jump in the bus and in the boat and go again. Where if we'd done that back in the 70s, you need 3 days laying down resting somewhere before they're capable of doing it again.
The good times were when there was a lot of scallops around.
Going home with a load of fish mainly. You're finished, you get to have a sleep.
There's absolutely no better feeling in the world. It's cracking daylight. You're sitting up in the wheelhouse on your own, everybody else is in bed. You've got a belly full of fish and you're heading home. That's as close as you can get to euphoria.
I think all fishing years ago was great. I enjoyed all my fishing. I love salmon fishing, but I enjoyed scallop fishing. There's a lot of boats. It was sort of difficult, but it wasn't all the paperwork that goes with it now, and all the prior reporting and the VMS monitoring and all the bullshit that goes with it these days. We've got to have it. That's how we keep sustainability, but it was a lot more fun when we didn't have it.
69, I was 19 then. 19 years old. I ran a 36-foot boat, and then 72, I built the Panagaea Terralgan. At them days we got rewarded, we made money. That little boat built me the Panagaea, put an engine in, done this, done that. You can't do it these days. You can't.
Don't like scalloping. Craying, love going back. Craying was a gentleman's game.
No, it was a great time. Made a lot of friends. And the part about it back in them days was exciting because no one knew what was over the horizon. Everything over the horizon was a new adventure.
We were young and fit, and everything was funny. Everything was funny. We just had a ball. We worked hard. We were making plenty of money. And everything was exciting. So they were the best days of my, and I'm sure Graham and John would say the same, of their fishing life.
It was a challenge and good times. And, when there was 10, 15 boats, a lot of time, a lot of the big boats sort of flogged at home and the smaller boats there, or the younger guys that didn't want to go home would like to have a bit of a play, and then we end up in Lady Barron on Flinders Island. They made a hell of a lot of money out of us. And
at the pub?
At the pub, at the Lady Barron pub there. Especially when you get 20 odd boats in there and from Victoria, and then you get the Tasmanian ones. And it was just good times. They made a lot of money, and of course the money that went across the bar, nobody knew by 9 o'clock at night there. A normal pot that back in them days there was probably about $3 a pot. They could have been charging $10 a pot, and none of the crew or anybody would know, that they made a lot of money out of us. But it was good times, it really was.
They used to call it the Scallop Wars, but there wasn't a lot of Scallop Wars, not compared to, say, the Tuna Wars and the Prawn Wars and that, because there was plenty of scallops while they were going. So there wasn't a lot of angst in the fleet, which is good for an industry. You don't see that a lot. I don't remember anybody shooting each other.
No, there was a bit of fighting went on early days up to Lady Barron Tavern, which when all the Vicky boats were there. A few disagreements there. They got sorted out pretty quick, smart. Out the back, toe to toe, and back in, we'll have a beer now, mate, we sort that out. That went on quite a bit. And that all it all settled down when everybody got used to one another, and there'd be enough Nagala wind coming up to see 20 Victoria boats parked at Lady Brown Wharf, and they all up the pub and they're borrowing cars and they're going shooting Cape Barren geese and shooting turkeys and kangaroos and wild pigs and having a bit of a picnic actually. And that all went pretty good actually. There wasn't much angst amongst them really, because we're all fishermen. We all got to live in the same bloody waterway, don't we?
And so the unloading was incredible, and it was a buzz. And of course, the hotels there, they just boomed because everybody was being paid in cheques. So you'd come in, the crew wanted their money straight away. So you'd had the chequebook there, and they were getting, generally I think from memory, they were getting $2 a bag. So you'd pay them a cheque. The pubs all knew we were coming in, so they were cashed up. They'd cash the cheques, and you just make it out, you clear the cheque, sign it out to cash. And of course, as the limits increased, the crew would go out there. 2 days later, they'd be home, and there's their money sitting on the bar. And I remember looking down the Central Hotel bar one day there, and the crew were all bragging about, and they had their money, their cash, they cashed all their checks, and there was all these wads all the way down the bar, comparing. But it was wild, and it was great fishing, and it was fun, and there was a lot of camaraderie. I'm looking for the word here. Camaraderie. Thanks. There was a lot of camaraderie there, and they were good days.
It was an exciting time. It was maybe not as exciting as poling tuna and the reel. But it was good. We enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
It was like all fishing. It's good when it's good, but it's not when it's not. But I used to say one thing about when I did do it. When you go crane and sharking, everybody remembers the big trips. Everyone remembers when you caught 2 or 3 tonne for the week of crays, or someone caught 5 tonne of shark for the shot, and you filled the boat in a couple of days or whatever. You always remember that. Scalloping, you always remember the bad trips. You remember 47 hours or 45 hours or 42 hours and how long it took you to get them. All those times when you might be south of Bells and you go and whack them on in 10 hours and you're getting 15 bags an hour and you just be shoveling them off the tray. Nobody ever remembers those ones, Gary. You always remember the painful ones because they were painful.
I think in Port Phillip Bay in the 80s, 90s, we had some really good years there.
A good sociable sort of a Cape of Scalloping too, because all the boats sort of go away together and they all come home together, and it was at the pub together, and it was there was some entertaining evenings.